An elderly widow helped a stranger fix his car, unaware he'd return to grant her dying wish. Margaret Thornton had never considered herself particularly special for helping others. It was simply what decent people did. That's what her Charlie had always said before cancer took him 3 years ago, leaving her alone in the little blue house at the end of Willow Lane. The November wind rattled the kitchen window as Margaret stood at the sink, her arthritic hands submerged in warm, sudsy water. Outside, the maple trees had shed their fiery coats, their naked branches scratching against a steel-gray sky. Thanksgiving was coming, but Margaret had no one to cook for this year. Her daughter, Claire, had called last week with apologies thick in her voice. The kids had school commitments, and the flight from California was just too expensive. "We'll try for Christmas, Mom," Claire had promised, but Margaret had heard the same words last year. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she dried the last plate. 78 years old and talking to herself in an empty house. What would Charlie think? A sudden fit of coughing bent her double, her thin shoulders shaking with the effort. When it finally subsided, she glanced at the small orange prescription bottle on the counter, still untouched. The diagnosis from Dr. Fletcher had been clear: 6 months, maybe less. Congestive heart failure. The medications could help with symptoms, but couldn't stop the inevitable. She hadn't told Claire yet. What was the point? Her daughter had her own life 3,000 miles away. Margaret didn't want to be a burden. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled her from her thoughts. Through the window, she saw an unfamiliar dark sedan parked awkwardly halfway up her long driveway, hood open like a gaping mouth. A man in a charcoal suit paced beside it, phone pressed to his ear, frustration evident even at this distance. Margaret hesitated. Charlie would have been out the door already, toolbox in hand, but she was just an old woman with a failing heart. Still, she reached for her cardigan and stepped out onto the porch, the cold air stinging her cheeks. "Everything all right out there?" she called, her voice carried away by the wind. The man looked up, startled. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair graying at the temples and the harried look of someone running late for something important. "Car just died on me," he replied, walking toward her. "And of course no cell service out here. I have an interview in Portland in 2 hours, and I don't think I'm going to make it." "Portland's only 40 minutes away," Margaret said, descending the porch steps carefully. "If we can get you back on the road." The man's eyebrows rose. "We?" Margaret's lips curved into a small smile. "My husband was a mechanic for 43 years. I picked up a thing or two." 10 minutes later, Margaret was leaning over the engine, her silver hair tucked behind her ears, while the stranger, Michael Henderson, he'd introduced himself, held a flashlight. "Loose connection to your battery terminal," she said, pointing. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" Michael watched in amazement as the elderly woman's gnarled hands worked with surprising dexterity, tightening the connection with practiced movements. "Try it now," she instructed, stepping back. The engine turned over immediately, purring to life. Relief washed over Michael's face. "You're a lifesaver, Mrs. Thornton," he said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Most people wouldn't have bothered." Margaret shrugged. "It's what neighbors do." "We're not neighbors," Michael pointed out. "I'm not even sure how I ended up on this road." "Well, then it's what decent people do," Margaret replied. Another coughing spell hit her, and she turned away, not wanting this stranger to see her weakness. When she recovered, Michael was watching her with concern. "Are you all right?" "Just a cold," she lied. "You'd better get going if you want to make that interview." Michael hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and urgency. "At least let me pay you." Margaret waved him off. "Wouldn't dream of it. Just pay it forward someday." With reluctant thanks, Michael climbed back into his car. As he drove away, Margaret felt an unexpected pang of loss. It had been nice for a moment to feel useful again. She didn't expect to ever see Michael Henderson again. But 3 weeks later, as December painted the world in frost and holiday lights, a familiar dark sedan appeared in her driveway. Margaret was returning from her weekly trip to the grocery store, struggling with a small bag of essentials, when Michael stepped out of his car, smiling. "Mrs. Thornton," he called, hurrying to take the grocery bag from her trembling hands. "I was hoping I'd catch you." "Mr. Henderson," she replied, surprise evident in her voice. "What brings you all the way out here?" "First, it's Michael, please," he said, following her to the porch. "And second, I got the job." "The interview you helped me make it to?" "Regional director position at Portland General Hospital." Margaret's face brightened. "That's wonderful. Congratulations. I start after the new year, which means I'll be relocating to the area. He gestured toward the rolled papers in his hand. I actually wanted to ask your advice about neighborhoods. It was a transparent excuse, but Margaret found herself inviting him in for tea anyway. Something about his earnest smile reminded her of Charlie when he was younger, before life had hardened him around the edges. In her kitchen, with steam rising from chipped mugs, Margaret studied Michael more carefully. His suit was expensive but slightly rumpled. No wedding ring. The shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. "So what brings a big hospital director out to the middle of nowhere, Maine?" she asked. "Most ambitious types stay in the cities." Michael's fingers tightened around his mug. A change of pace. Boston was... He trailed off, then offered a simplified truth. "Work consumed me there. My wife left 3 years ago. Said she was married to a ghost." Margaret nodded, understanding in her pale blue eyes. "And now? Now I'm trying to remember who I was before the 60-hour weeks and the constant pressure." He glanced around her modest kitchen, with its faded curtains and well-worn countertops. "There's something peaceful about places like this. Until the pipes freeze or the roof leaks," Margaret replied with a dry chuckle that dissolved into another coughing fit. When it passed, Michael was watching her with the practiced eye of a medical professional. "That doesn't sound like just a cold, Mrs. Thornton." "Margaret?" she corrected, suddenly tired. "And no, it's not a cold." The truth spilled out then, like water through a cracked dam. The diagnosis. The prognosis. The untaken medications. What was the point of prolonging a lonely existence? Her daughter too busy with her own life to visit. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter, now just an empty shell of memories. "I've lived my life," Margaret concluded, surprised by her own candor with this near stranger. "I'm ready for whatever comes next. I just wish..." "What?" Michael asked gently. Margaret's eyes drifted to the faded photograph on the refrigerator, her, Charlie, and Claire at the old family cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee. Their last summer together before Charlie got sick. "I'd like to see the lake one more time," she said softly. "Our family cabin. We spent every summer there until Charlie got too ill to travel. Claire sold it after he passed. Some developer was going to tear it down for one of those luxury retreats." Her voice caught. "I understand why she did it, but I always thought I'd get to say goodbye to the place properly." Michael was quiet for a long moment, his eyes lingering on the photograph. Then he checked his watch. "I should go, but I'll be back, Margaret. If that's all right with you?" She smiled, thinking he was just being polite. "Of course. The driveway's always open." To her surprise, Michael returned the following weekend with a trunk full of groceries and a stack of old movies. "I thought you might like some company," he said simply. It became a pattern. Every Saturday, Michael would arrive with food or books or simply his presence. He fixed the leaking bathroom faucet, replaced the porch light, brought her medications from the pharmacy, and gently encouraged her to take them. "They won't cure me," Margaret protested. "No," Michael agreed, "but they might make the days more comfortable." January melted into February, and Margaret found herself looking forward to Saturdays in a way she hadn't anticipated anything in years. Michael never mentioned her illness directly after that first day, but his actions spoke volumes. The way he slowed his pace to match hers during their short walks around the property, how he made sure she ate properly, the careful attention he paid to her stories about Charlie and their life together. One Saturday in late February, Michael didn't come. Margaret told herself not to be disappointed. He had his own life, after all. He'd been more than kind already to an old woman he barely knew. But as evening fell and her little house creaked with emptiness, she felt the weight of her loneliness more acutely than ever. Sunday morning dawned bright and cold. Margaret was at the kitchen table with her tea when a knock came at the door. Michael stood on the porch, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he said. "Emergency at the hospital. But I'm here to make it up to you." Behind him was a sleek SUV engine running. "What's this?" Margaret asked, confused. "A day trip," Michael replied, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. "If you're feeling up to it, I've already cleared it with Dr. Fletcher." 2 hours later, Margaret sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar landscape pass by with a mixture of disbelief and growing excitement. She recognized this route. They were heading north toward New Hampshire, toward the lake. "Michael," she whispered, her heart fluttering in a way that had nothing to do with her condition. "Where are we going?" His eyes remained on the road, but a smile warmed his features. "I made some calls. Did some research. That development they were planning for the lakeside property? It fell through. Financial issues. Margaret's breath caught. The cabin? Still there. A bit weathered but standing. He glanced at her then, gauging her reaction. The new owners are friends of mine from medical school. When I told them your story, they were happy to let us visit. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Such a simple thing, yet it meant everything. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, its green paint faded by winters and summers passing without her, but the porch swing still hung from rusty chains, and the view of the lake, frozen now in February, was exactly as it had been etched in her memory. Michael helped her from the car, supporting her arm as they made their way to the porch. Margaret's legs trembled, not from weakness but from the overwhelming flood of memories. Charlie building the swing while Claire, just 7, supervised with all the seriousness a child could muster. Summer evenings watching fireflies dance over the water. The last Christmas they'd spent here, before the diagnosis that changed everything. "Would you like to go inside?" Michael asked softly. Margaret shook her head. "This is enough, just to see it once more." She squeezed his arm. "Thank you, Michael. I don't know why you've been so kind to me, but I'm grateful." Michael was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the frozen lake. "When I was 12, he finally said, my father left us. Just walked out one day. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, but she got sick. Cancer. There was a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who had no reason to care about us. But she did. She brought us meals, helped me with homework, sat with my mother during chemo when I was in school." His voice thickened. "I never got to thank her properly. She died while I was in medical school." He turned to Margaret, his eyes bright with emotion. "When my car broke down on your driveway, you didn't have to help. You were a stranger. But you did. And somehow I knew this was my chance to do for someone what Mrs. Peterson did for me." Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Not the painful pressure of her failing heart, but a warmth that spread outward, melting the resignation she'd carried for months. "Well," she said, blinking back tears, "it seems we were meant to find each other." As winter reluctantly released its grip on Maine, Michael's visits increased. Margaret found herself taking her medications regularly, not because she believed they would save her, but because she wanted to be present for whatever time she had left. She began telling Michael to bring his work with him. She was content to sit quietly reading while he answered emails or made calls. They developed a comfortable routine. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they simply existed in the peaceful quiet of the old house. Margaret taught Michael how to make Charlie's famous apple pie. Michael helped Margaret sort through old photographs, listening attentively as she narrated the stories behind each one. In early April, Margaret called Claire. It was time for truth. "Mom, we can come right away," Claire insisted after hearing the diagnosis, horror and guilt mingling in her voice. "No need to drop everything," Margaret assured her. "I'm doing all right for now, but I would love to see you and the children soon." She didn't tell Claire about Michael. That story would take too much explaining, and she wasn't entirely sure she understood it herself. The following Saturday, Michael arrived with more than his usual overnight bag. He carried a thick manila envelope, which he placed carefully on the kitchen table as Margaret poured their customary tea. "What's this?" she asked, noting the official-looking seal on the front. Michael took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about the cabin, about saying goodbye properly." He pushed the envelope toward her. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Margaret unsealed the envelope and withdrew a stack of legal documents. She stared at them, uncomprehending, until certain phrases jumped out at her. Transfer of property, Lake Winnipesaukee, and her name listed as the recipient. "Michael," she whispered, looking up in disbelief. "What have you done?" "I bought it," he said simply. "From the owners. They were planning to sell anyway." Margaret shook her head, overwhelmed. "But why?" "Michael, this must have cost—" "Because everyone should have a chance to say goodbye properly," he interrupted gently. "And because—" he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because these past few months you've given me something I thought I'd lost in Boston. A sense of purpose beyond work. Connection. You've become family to me, Margaret." Tears spilled down Margaret's weathered cheeks. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can," Michael insisted. "And there's something else." He reached for another piece of paper. "It's set up as a trust. After ... Well, afterward, the cabin goes to Claire and her family, with the condition that for 1 month every summer, it's used to host families of patients from the pediatric cancer ward at Portland General. Kids who need a vacation from hospitals and treatments." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. It was perfect. so perfect that for a moment she couldn't speak. Finally, she managed to ask, "How did you know?" Michael smiled softly. "You told me that first day we had tea, about Charlie's fight with cancer. How hard it was on Claire growing up with a sick parent. How much those summers at the lake meant to all of you, a place where cancer couldn't follow." Margaret thought her heart might burst, not from her condition, but from a joy so intense it felt almost like pain. In that moment, she realized something profound. She wasn't ready to die yet. There was still purpose here, still love to give and receive. "When can we go?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "As soon as the weather warms a bit more," Michael promised. "The doctor says you're stable enough for the trip if we're careful." In late May, when the lake had shed its winter ice and wildflowers dotted the surrounding woods, Michael drove Margaret back to the cabin, her cabin now. Claire flew in from California with her husband and children, meeting them there. The reunion was tearful, filled with apologies and forgiveness. Claire had carried her own guilt about selling the cabin, about not visiting more often. "I just couldn't bear to see you fade away like Dad did," she confessed, holding her mother's hands. "I understand," Margaret assured her. "We all do what we must to protect our hearts." For 2 glorious weeks, the cabin came alive again with laughter and footsteps. Margaret sat on the porch swing, watching her grandchildren splash in the shallows, their voices carrying across the water. Claire cooked in the kitchen, the same recipes Margaret had taught her years ago. And Michael fit into this tableau as if he'd always been a part of it, teaching the children to fish, helping Claire's husband repair the dock, bringing Margaret her medications with quiet attention. On their last evening, as twilight painted the lake in lavender and gold, Claire found her mother alone on the porch. "He's in love with you, you know," she said, nodding toward Michael, who was building a campfire down by the shore with the children. Margaret laughed softly. "Don't be ridiculous. He's young enough to be my son. Not romantic love," Claire clarified. "The kind that recognizes something kindred in another soul. The kind that builds families out of strangers." She squeezed her mother's hand. "Thank you for finding him, or letting him find you. I've been so worried about you being alone." When summer surrendered to autumn once more, Margaret's condition worsened. The medications could only do so much. But unlike the previous year, when November's chill had matched her spirit, Margaret faced her decline with a heart at peace. Michael was there almost daily now, having arranged his schedule at the hospital to allow for late afternoons and evenings at the little blue house. He'd moved into a cottage just 20 minutes away, close enough to be present but respectful of Margaret's independence. On a golden afternoon in October, sitting in the garden Michael had replanted for her in the spring, Margaret broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I've made all the arrangements," she said, watching a monarch butterfly dance among the late-blooming asters. "Everything's in order," Michael nodded, his throat tight. "Margaret, let me finish," she said gently. "I need you to know something. When you broke down in my driveway last year, I was ready to go. I'd made peace with it. I wasn't taking my medications. I was just waiting." Her blue eyes, faded but still bright with intelligence, met his. "You didn't just grant my dying wish, Michael. You gave me a reason to live my last year fully." Michael took her hand, so fragile now, the bones like bird wings beneath paper-thin skin. "You saved me first," he reminded her. "If you hadn't helped with my car that day," Margaret smiled, "perhaps we saved each other." In November, a year after their first meeting, Margaret's heart finally surrendered to its long battle. She passed peacefully in her sleep, with Michael dozing in the chair beside her bed and Claire holding her hand. The funeral was small but well attended. Neighbors Margaret had known for decades, medical staff who had come to know her through Michael, and, to everyone's surprise, a group of children and their parents, the first families who would be staying at the cabin the following summer. After the service, Michael stood alone by the grave, a single white rose in his hand. "I kept my promise," he whispered, placing the flower atop the polished wood. "The first family moves in next June. A little girl with leukemia, her brother, parents who haven't had a vacation in 3 years because of hospital bills." He smiled through his tears. "They're going to learn to fish off that dock, make s'mores on the beach, create memories that cancer can't touch." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, sending a shower of crimson leaves spiraling around him. For a moment, Michael could have sworn he felt a gentle touch on his shoulder, like a farewell Or perhaps a thank you. As he walked back to his car, Michael spotted an old pickup truck parked awkwardly on the side of the road, hood up, a frazzled-looking woman peering into the engine with obvious frustration. He hesitated only briefly before changing direction. "Having trouble?" he called, approaching with a small smile. "I might be able to help. I learned from the best." The woman looked up, relief washing over her tired face. "Oh, thank goodness. It just died on me and I have no idea why." Michael rolled up his sleeves. "Let me take a look. My name's Michael, by the way." "Ellen," the woman replied, offering her hand. "Ellen Peterson." Michael froze, the name striking him like a physical blow. "Peterson?" "Yes," she said, puzzled by his reaction. "Why?" "No reason," Michael said after a moment, composing himself. "Just someone I used to know had that name." As he leaned over the engine, Michael felt a certainty deep in his bones. This was no coincidence. Somewhere Margaret was smiling. The circle was complete. Some acts of kindness, he realized, never truly end. They simply ripple outward, returning in ways we could never imagine, connecting strangers across time and circumstance, creating patterns too perfect to be mere chance. The engine sputtered to life under his hands. And somewhere new, the journey began again.